Hey, shalom, and welcome to Wisdom in Torah Ministries. And as you know, the last few weeks we have the pleasure to have Professor Mark Chavalas with us, and he is sharing with me his understanding of ancient Near Eastern history. If you don't know who Professor Mark Chavalas is, he has been a professor at La Crosse in I think Michigan, correct, Professor?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, I'm sorry. And he's been teaching for over 40 years on the engineers. Recently retired. And I reached out to him a few weeks back, almost a month ago. And he was very kind to exchange with me and teach me. So what we decided to do was on my regular classes that I have with him, to open it to the audience that I share, that I teach, so that we can all learn together. And then the whole structure is asking questions about certain topics that he wants to talk about, and then we dialogue along the way, connected with the Bible. Is understanding ancient Near Eastern history, Mesopotamian history, and also the biblical narrative. And I think it's important that when we look into this understanding of the Bible, remember that the book of Genesis was written to people who understood this language and the culture and its environment. Abraham came from the land of Ur. Then Jacob went to Laban's house, Padam Aram. Then you have this huge influence even later on in the time of the kings when they went to, after Solomon, when they went to Babylon, and also Assyria when the 10 tribes were scattered. So without the proper understanding of the ancient Near East, we're not going to really understand one quarter of the Bible, one third of the Bible. The other part is in Egypt. The other part happened in the Greco-Roman world. So what we're trying to do is trying to go to those areas of the world where there's so much relevancy with the biblical narrative so that we can understand the text better. And today we're going to be talking about um, just sacred space. What was the topic I gave you? I kind of forgot now.
Well, we have a couple things. Idolatry you mentioned, but before that you mentioned adoption. You had a question on the Teraphim, and then I had suggested women. So maybe this will be a whole mixed bag of
Yeah.
things.
You know, okay, so let's talk about the Teraphims, right? It's a family gods. So allow me to open up to see if I'm seeing the correctly based on the researches that we've done, that I've done. Um, Reading John Walton's and reading Mendenhall, reading McCarthy, and reading all those guys, we realize that, and also reading your stuff, is that you have the family gods, you have the community gods, then you have the national gods. For what I understood, I think is in the IVP commentary or the Sundervan, is that the Terrapins, the family gods, were connected with the inheritance.
Actually, that seems to be correct, uh, except when it isn't. We just don't know what they are. And so, for example, in the ancient Near East, um, uh, we have maybe I can even read one from here. This is an article by Van der Toorn,
Oh,
VAN.
very good. Vandertorn,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, he's well. He wrote 30 years ago. He wrote an article in the Catholic Biblical Quarterly called "The Nature of the Biblical Teraphim in Light of the Cuneiform Evidence." And so I took a look at that one. And by the way, this might sound sort of odd, but if you're looking and trying to understand Mesopotamian religion and gods and etc., maybe you've already seen this particular one by that is edited by Van der Toorn and others, Dictionary of Deities, Demons, uh, Deities and Demons in the Bible, DDD as we call it. There's also a nice little article on the Teraphim in here too. Um, but I don't exactly know what they are. Harry Hoffner, by the way, a strong evangelical Christian who studied the Hittites and the Bible too. He passed away recently, unexpectedly, but he was 80 years old. But he wrote an article finding the word teraphim in Hittite. It's the word tarpish. And these tarpish were either protective spirits or they were malevolent. In other words, they're kind of like demons in classical Greece. A demon is sometimes good and sometimes there are bad demons. And of course, in the New Testament, all demons were bad. That term daimon. So anyway, he finds them, at least the term, and so because the term teraphim is not a Semitic word, and so might be a loan word from Hittite, but we don't know how that worked. The Mesopotamians, when they talk about protective spirits that are usually household, they have a number of other terms. In fact, one of the word is shedu, and I think isn't there a biblical Hebrew term shedim? I think is the as sometimes false deities and demons and ghosts, etc. So for example, at you see a contract. This is from the city of Nuzi, which is late Bronze Age, about 1400 BC. It would be in Assyria in the north.
Where are you reading right now?
This is from excuse me, Van der Toorn's article in the Catholic Biblical Quarterly. And so he's got
a good article, by the way.
Yes, very good article. And so he's talking about the household gods. And here's records are, this is a deed of disinheritance. A disinherited son shall not have access to the gods. By the way, the term for the gods there, household gods, just Ilani, which is the plural form for gods. And so it's not even very specific. But he also doesn't have access to the etemo, which is the word for spirits of the dead.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean those are two different things, by the way. And he doesn't have access to fields or houses. And so,
well, I mean, for what I understand, the duty of the firstborn son was to take care of the burial and the firstborn blessing, which, by the way, don't you think that that would explain why Rachel sat on the Terapins? Because that was the guaranteed for his sons, that Jacob was deceived by Laban, actually.
Yes. And she and her sister must be upset either about the dowry they got from dad, just that
he stole it, man. He stole the dowry.
Right. And then they get two servant girls or whatever. And so
Right.
they clearly decide to take matters in their own hands. And by the way, that just if and when we get to the discussion of women, women in the Bible are either really, really proactive for good reasons, or they have really bad things happen to them, or they're proactive for bad reasons. And if you're wondering why you don't find any normal women who just sort of go along normally, it's because that's not good print. In other words, the whole point is that they're telling you a story about events that are unusual. And so anyway, so that's why they probably stolen them. And of course, that would be like stealing the family jewels, or
pretty much,
or something that would basically ruin your inheritance.
But interesting, Professor, because look at the regular reader, when you see that, you're going like, why would she do that? And I used to, okay, this is the way I taught it like 17, 18 years ago. Well, she was hiding her idolatry. She stole the gods of her father.
Yeah.
And I caught on to this because I began to ask the question. Actually, I was wrong about that interpretation. That's not the context. But what really provoked all this research was, I'm thinking, why did Jacob tell them after the incident in Shechem? He says, "Now put away your gods, the idols."
Yes.
And then they bury them in the by the tree of Memre, which is Alon More. Been in that area, by the way. It's kind of cool. So what I always thought, well, that's kind of strange, until I began to understand what it represented. If it represented their inheritance that they brought with them, that's a guarantee of their inheritance. What Jacob was asking them was a very serious covenantal oath and a decision of loyalty to God, instead of where they came from. Would you agree with that? Would that be somewhere in line?
I think you're absolutely right. It seems like an anecdotal statement, but I think it's very powerful. And by the way, just the mere fact that you mentioned, I've already looked at an article. All I can tell you is that what you're learning for me is basically simply confirming the stuff you've already studied. And so, and that just keeps on happening. And so, I mean, I just look at the enormous library you have behind you and all the stuff you studied. And I assume you leave your office once in a while and go do other things. But
Once in a while, I'm actually here 6 hours a day.
well,
My wife is trying to convince me. I train. I don't know if you know, I do jujitsu, so I go train and then,
yeah.
like, but I spend a lot of time here, and I'm passionate about the topic. I think,
Oh,
it made me realize how much I don't know about the Word of God, and sometimes we get so myopic in our approach to reading the Bible, and I used to be that way. And the sad thing, Professor, by the way, thank you for the compliment. It means a lot coming
sure.
from you, and you know understanding the Bible for me is very rewarding because I grew up in a background that scholarship and study was not really a priority. It was just basically, what does this verse seems to me? And
Yeah.
sometimes we do a disservice to the Word of God by just doing that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think, for example, the fact that Rachel basically is playing. I mean, Jacob made an oath. Whoever had the gods, he's saying, "Hey, I didn't take them." I mean, his honor is at stake. People don't realize how important what's going on. So
Yeah.
that event had to be not only in the realm of legality, but also preserving Jacob's honor. No one really thinks about it. It's like she's standing up for her husband,
Yeah.
you know.
Exactly right.
Which,
And
by the way, it opens the door to what we already understand that in the ancient world, if a woman marries a man, she would adopt the religion and the God of the man.
that's exactly right. In fact, Plutarch, the Greek writer, actually has a manual and talks about this when he has a little book called Advice on Marriage. And one of them, when he's talking to a newly wedded couple, he says, the woman, of course, and basically he's going to say something that everybody knows except us, that he says, the woman, of course, she's young, and when she leaves her house, she goes, and the one of the best things she can do is to come and adhere to the her husband's family deities. In other words,
Uh,
she's leaving hers, at least legally speaking, and she's now going to be the caretaker to I suppose one of the words that used for him is the Herms, and in ancient Greece, uh, which we evidently they were some sort of family deities, protective spirits, analogous to all this stuff that you would have in your house to protect you from evil spirits, general harm, bad weather, whatever it might be. Uh,
uh-huh.
and so it's interesting that Plutarch sort of maps out, which is seemingly sort of an old world idea that that when you're a young girl, you're not just leaving your family, you're going into and you're legally now part of a new family, a whole new set of
Yeah.
family deities, etc., and you've got to learn all about those, and it might take
Yeah.
a really really long time for you to do that, but you become quite earnest about, now you are now the, in a sense, now that I start having, popping out babies, I'm going to be, the caretaker of this family.
Right. I mean, that makes the story of Ruth even more relevant because she did that. She recommitted after her husband died. Talk about that. He didn't have to. She was free to go back to her identity, and
Yes,
she
and of
could
course,
regather her.
in that story, it's I think it's sort of implied that the reason she wants to do that is because of Naomi and Naomi's
Right.
character. She just loves this person. But you think about, I guess there are what, three occasions when God withheld the Sarah's womb, uh, and I think it's Rachel and Hannah, and all of them are asking their husbands, "Give me children." And
Right.
what they're saying, of course, is you need to take a surrogate. I'm going to initiate this for you. Take a surrogate who will now provide children, and legally they'll be mine, even
Right.
though they're biologically the surrogates.
I remember reading, I don't remember where, but I remember reading, I forget more than I remember now, is that the act of there'll be on my lap, something like that, I think the Bible uses. Is
Yep.
is isn't that like the symbolic gesture of the woman giving birth sitting on the lap as if it was the person's baby? It's an
Yes,
idiom.
that's probably what it is. In fact, uh, I'll try to say this in a very delicate way, but if you are, for example, at the ancient city of Urkesh, which is third millennium Hurrians, way up in the north of Syria, there's a representation of the king sitting on his throne, and right next to him is his son, and his son seems to have his hand in the father's midsection, which of course in our culture that looks rather odd, but the whole point there is that he's showing that he is part of this lineage. I'm connected to my father. I'm the heir apparent because I came from his loins.
Well, isn't that what Eliezer did with Abraham when he made him
Yeah.
the oath? That was very widely practiced. We just
Exactly.
covered that last week, and people are always astounded by that. They don't realize the significance of that oath because
Yeah.
we're thinking in the Western world, we have a different mindset. But to them, that was like, no, you have to swear not by me, but by my future children.
And it's very serious. And of course, I think that what the Bible uses the euphemism knees there, but it's pretty
Yeah.
obvious what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, you're right. But you're right. If we didn't know that, you look at that and say, that's a really weird custom. Are we supposed to do that too?
That's
Uh,
strange.
you know,
And what was I going to tell you? In regards to women adhering to the beliefs of the husband, that's what drew Solomon away because he
yeah,
did the opposite. He
yes,
adhered to the gods of all his wives.
yes. He wants to cater to all hundreds and hundreds of them.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
it's so
By the
ridiculous.
way, you were talking about the books on gods, and I also have this one by Omar Keel.
Oh, yes, that's a great one. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
amazing resource. I mean, you guys do amazing research, man. I mean,
Well, that's
I
pretty
sit
cool.
here and I read it, but you guys really, I'm telling you, I'm so in awe because it's like some of the stuff you guys find and then you put it together in words that I could understand, you know?
Well, that I can too, but I look at it this way, and I was raised in a blue collar family, and I found out I really like to work on this stuff. Uh,
Yeah,
and
hairpins.
yeah, yeah, those are, in fact, my joke about that book is I just look at the pictures.
I know, right?
Oh, they're so cool. I wish
Yeah, they got all those pictures.
it should be a pop-up book, but
I would
um,
love for you to go to Israel with me because there's a place that I know you'll love. It's called the Bible Lands Museum.
yeah, of course. I
You
mean,
know,
I know of it. I know of it.
I
Yeah,
spent hours there. It's right next to the Jerusalem Museum, and it's all about ancient Near Eastern stuff.
yeah.
And when I took my first tour, because I had a guide, unfortunately, he passed away last year. And he's the one who got me into a lot of the archaeology and biblical history and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I remember going in 2008 for the first time. He was my guide. And I used to teach a particular topic within the area that I ministered to. And when we went to tell Dan, and he started talking about the history. Now, I was supposed to be a teacher in the movement who was supposed to be one of the experts in that area that I'm listening to this guy. He mentioned 75 things that I've never heard before. 75%. Never heard. I'm going like, wait a minute. I'm supposed to know this topic. I'm teaching it everywhere. And this guy in like 15 minutes made me realize how much I don't know. So I went right to him right after. That was my first tour. That was
Oh,
actually the third day of my tour. And I
oh my,
said, hey, will you teach me? What you just said, I should know, and I don't. So this guy, wow, what a great man he was. He was he was a guide and an archaeologist. He was like an amateur archaeologist. He had actually a book of all of his archaeological things that he purchased. He made a book. It was over $1 million worth of that. It's
oh
incredible.
my goodness.
So he started giving me a book every year.
Wow.
I still have them. Give me a book. Say, okay, read this. So I will come back, I read it, I do more research, and I go back on the next tour and I will teach on it. That was basically, my study with him. And he got me all excited about this stuff. And, it's kind of cool because when we started studying history, and I told him, hey, I started doing Engineer East. He goes, really? Wow, you're the only one that I've done tours for that actually is interesting in that. I said, look, the whole trip, 15 days, we're going to talk about the Engineer East and the Bible. And then he goes, okay, we're going to go to the Bible Lands Museum, the Jerusalem Museum when we get to Jerusalem. So I'm heading to Jerusalem Museum, and he stayed in another place over there that I've been by for years, since 2004, but I never went in. And he said, hey, come over here. This is what you want. And he says, this is the best ancient Near Eastern museum in Israel, in Jerusalem, that hardly anyone goes to, you
Oh,
know. And we spent, oh my Lord, I spent so much. I remember they have galleries. They have galleries, right? So I spent almost, after the tour left, I went back by myself and I spent like 3 hours on the seal sections.
wow.
And it
Yeah.
was so cool because then I understood why Paul says you've been sealed into the day of redemption and what seals represented, the mark of the, I mean, it was amazing. And that's what really triggered all this excitement about, studying the Bible.
And
Because without the context, you can't get it.
and I know a lot of people think that this can be done simply for academic reasons, and that is true, of course.
Yeah,
But I can tell by talking to you, and I believe I have the same feeling, is that you're ultimately doing this for the purpose of understanding, our Maker better,
absolutely. Oh,
so
yeah.
we can commune with him and understand. And so if this helps me understand, now of course I've been accused of getting into the weeds so deep that I forget about the other part,
Me
and
too. Me
and
too.
that's fine. That's another issue. And so, can we commune with God without knowing this? Yes. Can we do it on a level that I can understand things better and deeper? Yes. God made us as mental beings and spiritual beings together, and so there's one isn't better than the other. And even the gospel, if you think about it, the only reason I believe in the gospel is because I ultimately believe it makes intellectual sense. Because if I didn't think it made any sense, why would I believe in it? And so,
I got to,
yeah,
I agree with you. I
and I
mean,
take that intellectual assent, then I decide I willingly give my heart over to it,
right.
at that point. But
That's
you
where I'm at.
both, yes,
That's exactly why I'm at. It's like I remember reading things in the ancient Near East that all of a sudden now something that was said in the New Testament now makes sense.
yeah,
For me, our passion that we have for something that is irrelevant to many people. It's like to many people. I'm telling you, I get so much backlash because I talk about ancient Near East temple, ancient Near East temple, ancient. I mean, 613 commandments and 279 of them in the Torah deals with a temple. You will think 45% of something is important. So I'm going, so I take the same approach. I wanted to know, well, why was Balaam coming on a donkey? How come the Bible says that Moses went back to Egypt on a donkey? And it keeps repeating over and over and over and over. I'm going, what in the world's going on? So the same thing with idolatry. People don't realize that the commandments or the Torah, the 10 sayings, the 10 words, the way that it places idolatry and adultery in the same penalty is very unique to
yeah,
any other document in the ancient world.
yeah, absolutely. Because of course, I think in Mesopotamia there isn't really any concept of idolatry, unless you uh, make the statue incorrectly. So I was looking this up too. In
Yeah.
fact, it was a fellow. Um,
Repeat that again. Wait. What you just said is, I think, is important. Repeat that again.
so what did I say? That there's no
About they make the statue incorrectly.
Yes, making the statue incorrectly for a Mesopotamian. And by the way, this is an article I wasn't familiar with, but I just looked it up really quickly. He was actually an Israeli Mesopotamian scholar. His last name is Gabay, Gabbay. And this is from a little electronic journal. Are you familiar with? It's simply called the Torah.
Yeah, I
Um,
was just on that website today.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, look at this one. I don't have the title here, but it's Uri Gabay, and it's on idolatry. And he, in fact, I think a week or two ago we talked about the
The
cult
image of
statue
God.
and the stuff by Michael Dick. Do
Right.
you want?
Mispe. The
Yeah.
Mispe.
Yes. Well, this is about a purification ritual. In other words, in Deuteronomy in 4 and 5, it talks about, forbidding, the worship of images, etc. In Mesopotamia, and I know I brought this up a little bit before, but the point is you can create a statue, and of course it's not the deity. The deity is not invited in until you've purified the statue. And
Right.
the ritual they have to go through is sort of ridiculously detailed. It's as detailed or more detailed than the precision that is made, for example, to make the tabernacle or the ark
Yeah.
of the covenant or whatever. And so let's see, let me just bring up a very brief note or two about what he says. Yes, craftsman. Yeah, the craftsman's tool. We have a fragment of a text from the library at Nineveh. There's seven different things they have to do on different days. On the morning of the first day, the priest responsible for the entire ritual goes out to the riverbank. He makes an offering. He draws water into 7 bowls. He fills the bowls with certain things, and it's very, very specific. Then he returns to the city with the bowls. Then he enters into the workshop and performs the first mouth washing on the statue that has already been made. Then what I thought was really interesting, he goes back to the river with his tools, and he throws the tools into the river. And this is, by the way, making a statue of Ea Enki,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
wisdom. And so basically saying the tools aren't mine. And then he goes and retrieves the tools, and he says, these tools are now, in other words, I didn't make the statue. It was made by a heavenly being.
Yeah.
So, and so he's going through all this ritual. And if they do anything wrong, they have to start over. They have to destroy the image.
Maybe that will be. Do you think that may be the reason why the priests in Israel, because we know Adam is the image, humanity is the image of God. So, but in the Bible, it's quite interesting that when it talks about sacred space in the temple and the duties of the priest for the temple, there are certain things, body deformities that were not allowed because
Right.
we're supposed to be the image of God. So if
Right.
we are defective, then it shows that you know what I mean. I think it might be there might be a connection with that.
Yes, I think there is. And of course, for us, we immediately think of that as some sort of inferiority. And that's actually irrelevant, but it's
Right.
hard for us, but for it's sort of inbred in us. And the whole issue, for example, women have a lot more restrictions because of blood loss and the menstrual cycle, et cetera. And it doesn't seem fair.
Hmm.
And of course, there's no description about that. But I think I mentioned this a week or so ago before, is because, of course, blood is considered, the core of life.
Yeah.
The male semen is the core of life, and so you have to be at full in order to access the deity. So, but anyway, idolatry, of course, I can't remember the verse, but I think it's in Isaiah somewhere where it's really connected to loyalty. In other
Yeah.
words, you have to be loyal to the Lord. That
Ava.
that loyalty is not understood in Mesopotamia. So, for example, if I'm a reigning king and I come into your kingdom and I want to defeat you and shame you, I'll actually go into the temple, and I might even violate your deities and take. Usually, I won't destroy them. What I'll do is I'll take them away, and I'll bring them back to my town, because of course, let's say you're Babylonian and I go down and take Marduk and I take him away. Now your city is completely vulnerable. It'd be like me
Right.
knocking the walls down. And because Marduk really, and you know why that happened? Because Marduk was angry with you.
Right.
And it's really no different than you think about it than the Babylonians coming into Jerusalem, destroying the temple, taking sacred objects. And of course, we don't know what happened to the ark, or at least I don't know what happened to it. But the point is what they're doing there is that the Jewish writers come up with the idea, and of course, I think this is divine, is that God must be angry with us because
Right.
God's still all powerful. It's not him, it's us.
Right.
So
Right.
what did we do wrong? How do we get back? Of course, and what does Jeremiah say? Well, you ignored the Torah. And so
You
that's all
know,
you're going to have left.
the interesting thing about the point you're making, Professor, is that when you look into ancient Near East, as you know, they were very capricious, and they believed that the underworld. How many of the before I forget my point, and then I'll ask you this question about how many of the ancient religions were connected with the apple to prayer worship, underworld deity stuff. Um, but it's interesting how you have shaming of the gods and the temple and the people.
Yeah.
And when they conquer something, profaning sacred space, right?
Right.
So, when you have the whole idolatry thing, and God says, do not worship anything above and below, under the water, whatever, 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 is because the word love, loyalty is love.
Yes.
It's interesting. Moran, I have this one. I'm sure you know who these guys are. Essential Papers of Israel and the Ancient Near East.
And
And
his
it has an article.
article, love, the love of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Moran did a really good job on this one. Um, and he talks about the love. And well, wait a minute, it's not on this one.
Well, I know the article
You know the article.
somewhere.
Yeah. Here, yeah, no, it is here. It's
Okay.
called William Moran,
Yeah.
Ancient Near East Background of Love and in Deuteronomy. I gotta tell you, when I understood this article, that really transformed my understanding with because God so loved the world in the book of John.
Yeah. Yes. In fact, what it means, he chose it. This is a legal thing. God made his connection, and he's becoming, you know, I don't know what the word you want to use. Believing loyalty. You're connected to God.
Allegiance?
Yes, allegiance. That's a better one. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that the whole premise in the gospel when Paul is writing to the Romans says, hey, if you believe in your mouth that Yeshua is your Kyrios, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you shall be safe. I mean, talk about the contrast between the emperor and now Yeshua being the leading instead of the Caesar, the leader. It's talk about allegiance. You have to. I found out the word witness in the book of Revelation. There is actually the word for martyrdom.
Martyrdom. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
that was amazing.
Yeah.
Loyalty until death.
And by the way, this fellow Moran, uh,
Yeah.
someday you're going to be learning a little bit of Akkadian, especially if you've already learned some Hebrew. This will be a snap for you. Don't worry
Okay.
about
What's the name of that book?
John Unergaard, very imaginatively, A Grammar of Akkadian. This is the book I use to teach my students. Um,
Okay.
and his teacher was William Moran.
Oh,
And here's his dedication at the beginning to Moran, best teacher, dearest friend.
no, that's awesome.
Unigard is just retired from the University of Texas a few years ago. In fact, whenever I had students ask me hard Akkadian questions, I said, "Well, go right to Unigard." I don't.
Yeah.
So they were
I
always doing
appreciate,
it.
I appreciate the recommendation. Are you trying to send me a message? I better start learning Akkadian.
Well,
Is that my homework now?
it's well, put it this way, you can get that book as a PDF file. There's also an answer guide. And even if it was just a few minutes to look at it, you're going to say, boy, this sounds like funny Hebrew. It'd be,
Right.
again, it's kind of like with your Spanish background. And I say, all right, you got to go learn, you can't look at Spanish anymore, but you got to learn Latin. You're,
Yeah.
you're going to look at it and say, 75, 80, 90% of it, you're going to look at it and say, oh, I know what that word is.
Right. Right. Right.
The syntax might be different, but the
Eventually, I'll catch on to it.
yes,
It's
exactly.
like Italian. I listen to Italian
Oh yeah.
for the first 5 minutes, and I listen to a conversation and start picking up words. Then I know more or less the context, and then I pay attention to the other little bitty words. You know, um,
Well,
my father.
watch out there because burro uh, is butter in Italian,
Oh, really?
a little donkey. So you better. But it's funny because I told you I learned a little bit of Spanish in school, but also with my Mexican acquaintances in Southern California. But then my director Bucciolati was an Italian, so they would speak lots and lots of Italian on the dig. And I said, all
Yeah.
right. So as soon as I learned a little bit of Italian, my Spanish sort of evaporated because I realized they were
Different
so
words.
close,
Yeah.
and that if I tried to generate the conversation, it was always now in Italian.
Yeah. That's cool.
Poorly.
What really? Let's go back to idolatry and let's talk about about the prayer worship. The influence of demons in the ancient Near East versus in the Torah is about uh, maintaining sacred space devoid of death. That's a
Yes.
big contrast between
Oh,
ancient Near East. So tell us a little bit about the religions and why was that the underworld or the was so prevalent and demons because they believe demons did everything for the gods were so mad They send demons to attack them.
Well, and like I said, demons are sometimes good and sometimes bad in the ancient Near East and also in Greece, like I said. But
Yeah.
in other words, there's a hierarchy of divinities. I instead of saying divinities, I probably should just say heavenly beings.
Right.
And so you've got and they're sort of, they have a social organization that we have as humans. So humans, you got royalty, average person, slaves, etc. And the same thing in Mesopotamia, the gods are there, and so the you have high gods, lesser gods. The term Anunnaki, which is now being thrown around all sorts of circles, Christian and otherwise, they're obsessed with that.
I know, crazy, right?
Yes. So anyway, you have a hierarchy of deities, then you've got lesser gods, and you've got slave gods, and then you even have what we might call demons, and messenger gods, etc., angels or whatever. They seem to be lesser, but they're sort of easier to deal with than in fact, you even have a hint of that, I think, in the Bible. We think of all the patriarchs as monotheistic, and of course they understand loyalty, but they probably don't understand their theology like we do. And so if you would have asked them, what exactly does it mean to be a follower of the Lord, and how is he different than all the other gods, they probably couldn't articulate it very well.
I would agree with you. I mean, especially
Yeah.
Abraham, if you think about what God did for him, he called him out of his land, his family, his environment, to reject his identity and his whole
Yeah.
inheritance, to
Yeah.
get to know a period of 24 years, trying to get to know this God. And then he recognized his character to the point he's saying, okay, I'll get the circumcision. I'll go in covenant with you.
Yeah.
But when we study the Bible, we assume these people had it all figured out.
Nope, not at all. And we don't either, by the way, but
At all.
at least we can see the end result of it. But it also helps me understand how they operate and act, because I shouldn't simply read Genesis and say, well, Abraham did this, this, and this, therefore I should. No, in fact, it's usually the opposite. That because he's making all sorts of rookie mistakes, I suppose you could say,
Right.
in his relationship with God.
Do you think that's the reason why the Bible doesn't emphasize at all in demons? Like, for example, it's only, I think, one or
Oh,
two
yeah.
verses that because they don't want to. It's like no weapons formed against us shall prosper. I mean, if the God of Israel, a quick example, um, they believe that if you have mold in your house, demons are attacking you,
Yes, right.
and then I think God is kind of is telling Moses, "Hey, just tell Israel to relax. If it's there, just make it whole, fix it. If it comes back, just destroy the house." It's like go stop thinking the negative way over here, like demons
Right.
have any power.
Well, I'll throw out one that might be controversial, but
Oh,
in
really?
Leviticus 16, the scapegoat, well, the name for the scapegoat, Azazel,
Yeah.
but even in later Jewish literature, that's
Uh-huh.
a demon. And in Mesopotamia, we've actually
Yeah,
found the
Kidu.
term, that as early as Ebla, this is mid third millennium, as they talk about the scapegoat. And so if Azazel clearly has been demoted, he's no longer a personal being, but the name is the same.
Right.
It's still the a Mesopotamian, a demonic force. And
Talk
so
about
really weird.
it sure is, but think about the power of the psychology of the offerings, I call it. Because I think God is utilizing or he is allowing Israel for their conscience. That's what Hebrews really talks about. Because the difference between the temple is that versus the pagan temples. As you know, if I'm wrong, please correct me. I mean, I don't care if it's we on air. Please correct me because I want to teach the right thing. But for what I know is that the ancient Near Eastern temples, they were by and large focusing more on protecting against evil spirits and demons and
Yeah,
stuff like that. So in the Bible, it's the opposite. Leviticus 16, verse 15 and 16 clearly tells you that, and this is a departure from anybody in the ancient Near East, in that the temple and the altar is defiled not by demons but by the transgressions and rebellions of Israel,
that's exactly right.
and
That's
that is so different.
Yeah, it's very different. And uh and Yeah, I think that that's exactly correct. The gods in Mesopotamia are sort of they're named, but they're all pretty much the same. In other words, you look at the character sketch and you can see that gods might have different vocations, but in terms of their personality and how they operate, they're not that different. It's as if there's some sort of framework. But then you look at, the God of Israel is highly personal. He's not he's irregular in the sense that you can't expect to know what he is going to do in a given situation. It's he's wild, I suppose you could say, in the sense,
Yeah,
that's because he's God. Uh,
right. But
and
something that really keeps me in awe of God, although He has obviously all the power, all the might, He could have eliminated the earth and start from scratch.
right,
But based on His oath, and that's what the power of an oath is so important, because this God that I've never seen makes an oath and He abides by it.
yeah,
So, and then you see the Bible and you see the temple and you see Israel. And I really truly believe, Professor, that God is sending a message with the ritual of Yom Kippur so that the audience would have understood that the enemy that they so fear around in the environment and the nations has no power, that it bears the guilt if they repent, for the impurities of the temple has nothing to do with that. It has all to do with themselves. Talk about empowering them, not to
yeah.
be afraid and demystifying their mindset in the environment of myth. I mean, it's completely different.
Oh, by the way, fun thing about I'm going to just another cut for Akkadian. The verb to cover in Akkadian is kaparum, and so
Oh,
it's the same root. And so,
right.
uh, and Bucciolati would always, when I had him, he would always make those connections because he understood that we did. Unfortunately for me, when I got to UCLA, they only I think I might have mentioned this before. They only had advanced biblical Hebrew, and so I couldn't take advanced before I had beginning biblical Hebrew. And
Yeah,
so instead, I took other Semitic languages, and they assumed I was one of the. There was only two of us that had not taken any Hebrew, but we sort of learned it through the back door by
yeah.
learning all these other weird languages. That'd be like, no Spanish, but I learned Italian and French and Portuguese and Romanian,
Kind of the
and
same route, though. So
yeah,
it
so
will be a little easier, I guess.
a
You have
little
foundation.
easier, but it just means that I can't be authoritative at all about. I have to read somebody else to find out what's going on. But yeah, that covering, it has the same. Etymology doesn't always work, of course, but it
Yeah,
certainly helps. We even know that just from Spanish to English. Just because a word has the same root, it doesn't mean it's used by
that's
the
true.
by the
That is, yeah,
borrowing language,
yeah.
the same.
It,
Uh,
when it comes to worship and idolatry, so I'm kind of curious because, when doing the Egyptian type research on temples and worship and stuff, but Mesopotamia, I found that the kings, they saw themselves as primordial atoms, and they also had gardens and everything, and the altars they built. I know the Assyrian king, I think Ashurbanipal, he had I think if that's the right one, he had a big garden with a water going through it and an altar in the middle of it. It's quite interesting. The
Ashur,
motifs are the same.
yes, Ashur-Nasir-pal, which is about 2 centuries earlier, is the one who has the garden. I think Ashurbanipal might have one also, but
Yeah,
but
but I think you're right. It's the one you mentioned.
yeah, so he's the end of the 9th century BC, so about 2 centuries before uh, Ashurbanipal, but for the same, well, they're sort of from the same royal line. We're not
Yeah.
sure. But anyway,
So I got a question. Funny question.
all right.
What is the deal with all the weird names in the ancient world? I mean, come on. I mean, there's
Well,
some weird names. I mean, there
well,
has to be a reason that I don't know why the names are so weird.
well, okay. So the reason that they're okay. So, for example, in the Bible, when they talk,
Anybody ever ask you that question before?
oh yeah, but
Okay,
but
good.
they are. When I started learning Akkadian, I realized that all the biblical names are their Hebrew forms, just like, when I say Jesus, obviously I've anglicized a term. And
Right.
by the way, even if I use the term Yeshua, my tongue-in-cheek statement is that might be right, but since we don't have a biblical Hebrew person, in other words, biblical Hebrew is a dead language. I don't know how it was pronounced, and
Uh-huh.
I think I was able to transport somebody here, they'd probably all be giggling with all the weird, funny accents that everybody has in terms of trying to mention people's names. But anyway, so for example, let's say the king that is mentioned, I think only once or twice in 2 Kings 15 or so, Tiglath-Pileser. Sounds
Oh
pretty weird.
yeah.
Okay, well, that's the Hebrew form of Tukulti Apil Eshara, which means Tukulti is from a Akkadian verbal root, which means is takala, which is trusting, to trust, to be loyal to.
Yeah.
And Apil is the term palum for one of your descendants, and Ashara is a deity. And so Ashara has been
Oh,
loyal to give me an ancestor, is basically,
got
in
it.
other words, his name is a full sentence.
Right.
Ashurbanipal. Um,
Ashur, the area he came from.
yes, but it's also the name of the deity.
That's true.
So, Banum is the word in Arabic that we have bint. It means created being, but it's your child, it's your descendant. Um, and so they all have very specific meaning,
Okay.
except when they don't. But of course, the Bible has the same thing. I mean,
It's
you
the
look
same
at,
thing. Hebrew names are the same.
look at. I mean, can you imagine when your first child comes out and say, "Look, it's a boy," and of course, Reuben.
Yeah.
And it's as if the wife said, "First thing out of my mouth, that's the kid's name."
Yeah.
Uh, you know,
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. Um, I wanted to ask you about, I got so many questions about engineering and idolatry and stuff like that. I think so. When it comes, man, I just had my question. I kind of lost it.
that's
When
all
it
right.
comes to idolatry, let's go to idolatry. I got so many things in my mind. I didn't write them today. Um, but when it comes to idolatry and kingship, all right. So let's talk about hierarchy. You have the king, and then you have the prince. Reading one of the documents from, actually also from Keel, Omar Keel, book is right over there, talks about that in the, um, at least the Egyptians or in the ancient Near East, when the king was enthroned, they changed names. They give them different names.
Certainly in Egypt,
In
and
Egypt,
we don't know in Mesopotamia.
do you think that Isaiah 9:6, when it talks about the names, Givol and Aviad and, Sarhapanim or Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace, do you think that lines up more with the Egyptian understanding of kingship? It's talking about a king, and they were going through a kingdom. Like they were having interchange. The whole problem between Israel and God was because they make a covenant with God, but then Babylon comes around, and God says you're going to go to Babylon, but then the king says no, I'm going to make a covenant with the Egyptians. There was a huge transgression of an oath. Anyway, so
My first guess would be no, and
uh-huh,
but it's for generic reasons. I think when the Israelites go into Egypt, that's a foreign land. It's like another planet.
right,
So I think the similarities there are extremely superficial, but when they make cultural comparisons, their comparisons are always much closer to their West Semitic neighbors, Canaanites,
the Canaanites.
and to Mesopotamia.
That's
And
true.
so I think when they're in Egypt, they probably worked really, really hard to keep their own identity as Asiatics, and they probably were
True.
they were probably kept that way by the Egyptians. Like, we're really, really different, even though we're close in proximity. There's a lot of different stuff, and unfortunately, I know you haven't been able to get a hold of Jim Hoffmeyer yet, and I might
I
think of a
will.
few other people's uh,
Yeah.
to deal with, but I think that it's a really, really different world. And obviously, because they were there for so long, there are some
Similarities, maybe.
for example, even Egyptianisms, Egyptian loanwords. There are very, very few of them, relatively speaking,
Yeah.
that enter into Hebrew. And so I think they tried very hard to keep their identity. So
So obviously, so they have more similarities with the Canaanites in the sense of they live in the same environment, the same area anyway. So contrasting, the Bible with the Canaanites will be actually closer to understanding the
yes,
context.
yes. And that's
I,
why uh, all these, I think I mentioned the city called Emar, Emar,
yeah,
which is inland Syria. Thousands of texts were there. That probably helps me understand uh, Israelite customs better than anything else. The Canaanites on the coast, we don't have a lot of their daily life documents, and so it's really hard to get a handle on them. But we have a lot, thousands of these administrative texts uh, from the inland areas, and of course, Imar is right in Padam Aram, right
right.
in that particular
How,
region where the patriarch. That I really think that's the patriarchal homeland. It's not.
right.
It's not or the Chaldees. It's Padam Aram where the
Yeah.
Amorites.
I read part of the article that you proposed that thesis,
Yeah.
and which I thought that was quite interesting because, you know, um, I never really heard that thesis, but you actually make a good point because connecting all the information, I understood what you're trying to say. It will seem more logical because I mean, but at the same token, they came from and then we try to discuss which one we're talking about.
Yes.
Um, but why did Abraham take all those people with him when God told him, leave your father's house and leave your country? I mean, he took a whole bunch of people with him.
Well, even when you look at Genesis 12, it's like, okay, so when does God actually speak? We like to think when we're reading Genesis, we're supposed to read everything in order. It's all chronological. And so,
Yeah, I know.
but I'm not so sure that's happening. And so when does God actually speak to Abraham? Is he still at Ur? Is he, I know that's the later tradition. Is he in Haran? And by the way, there's an intimate connection between Ur and Haran. They're the two cities in the Near East that have the moon god as the mayoral deity, and so it would make perfect sense for him to leave. And
Right.
and why does he go to Haran? Does God tell him to go to Haran? No.
So,
So
road. I mean, that's the main travel area, though. To
yes,
the
except that if you want to go to Canaan, there's no reason to go way up there. You could have crossed the desert. I mean, there's lots of other ways to
would have
do
been
that.
a long. It would have been a long route through the desert, though.
Yes, it would have been terrible. But and by the way, the fellow who edited that book, Barry Beitzel, the top ancient Near Eastern geographer, is also a very strong Christian, and very kind man. If he's able to, if you ever contacted him, hopefully you could find him. But if you ever want to know anything about geography, he's your guy.
Well, what's his name again?
Beitzel, Beitzel, and that Lexham Geographic Commentary, he's
Yeah.
the editor.
Oh,
They're going to do 5 volumes of that stuff, and I think what 1 or 2 have come out so far, and so um, he's the general editor of the whole thing.
well, that's awesome. Yeah, I like to get in touch with these guys.
Yeah,
Learn a
so
lot from them too. But
so anyway, so he goes up to Haran, and does he understand what he's doing? When I mean, you're right. He's still with his family. He's still with his father, and of
yeah,
course, when it says leave your fathers, it means leave your ancestors. And of course, at Or, and we're assuming that this probably happened up in Haran too, is that what do you do with your dead ancestors? You bury them in your own house in
yeah,
some cases, not in I mean, in some cultures in that area, you bury them in a cemetery. In some cultures, you buried grandma and grandpa underneath maybe even your bedroom floor, and they're actually still part of your family in some cultures. They just don't get around as well any longer. They don't move around, but they still need water and food.
yeah.
And that's, of course, what the firstborn son is supposed to do, is to take care of those parents
Give
after
them a
they
good burial.
because you're still going to have an existence. And so if you're not buried correctly, you're going to have a terrible existence. And so And I think I might have mentioned this before. This is why Joseph, with an incomplete understanding of things, is demanding when they're leaving Egypt, I want to take my bones with you. I don't want to
Right.
stay here.
You don't want to stay here. Yeah.
And so that we as as the end of the covenant, we can look back and say, well, that's not how God operates, but that's how they thought of things.
Well,
And just
now it makes,
just because an Israelite speaks it doesn't mean it's correct.
yeah. Well, I mean, now that you mentioned that about being buried in their houses, it makes sense why the Bible is so adamant about corpse impurity. They want to make sure that there's no connection with death.
Right. And for Abraham, when he's told to leave his fathers, he's leaving the ancestors behind that are buried. It doesn't necessarily mean his own father who
Oh,
go along with a ride with him. I don't know,
yeah.
but
I didn't think about that before.
fathers, I here's a and I didn't fully understand this until I was talking with one of my workers once. And we're speaking in, like, I'm speaking in second grade Arabic, and he's been kind to understand it. And I hadn't seen him for a year, and so asking him a question. So he was asking me something about age, and he's lived in the desert. He looks pretty old and wrinkly, and I don't look that way because, of course, I've been living in Southern California, and
Yeah.
and so he thought I was really young. And I said, how old do you think I am? And he says, oh, you're probably about 22. And I said, I've been excavating over here for 8 years. Do you think I was 14 when I started? He goes, no. And at the time I was about 30. And I said, so how old are you? And he looked at me, he says, I don't know. I said, what do you mean? You don't even know how old you are? And then I said, I know that. I mean, I could tell you the day and the month. And in fact, I was born at 5:31 in the morning and blah, blah, blah. And
Yeah.
he looks at me and he says, how many fathers do you know?
Oh, wow.
I said, first I was sort of insulted, and I realized, oh, well, Dad,
Yeah.
Grandpa William, he died when I was 2.5. And I know in the old country,
Yeah.
Teraphim. And I said, 3. He rattles off 30.
Wow.
And I said, okay, who has a better handle on on his past? He doesn't know the year he was born, but he knows exactly what family he's in. And since mine was fragmented because we left Greece, I don't even, I can only go back 3 generations.
Which which explains the genealogies then.
Yes, exactly right.
It explains the genealogy and it tells you why we always, like in the Hebrew prayer, blessed are you, O Lord, our God, King of the universe, God of our forefathers, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the great and us. Now makes sense. That's quite interesting. I never heard that before. That's really awesome. So,
Yeah.
although he doesn't know his day of birth, because in the Middle East, uh, it's not really when you're born, it's when you die because you leave a legacy.
Yep. Yeah, exactly right. So anyway, back to idolatry. I'm sure you're like a dog on a tire. You got to get back to this thing, which is great.
Actually, no. By you going in a different direction, you
Yeah,
answering and helping me connect things more in the Bible. But the biggest thing I'm trying to realize, people don't realize. Okay, in regards to idolatry, when you have and this was my original point that I kind of went left. I went on left field too.
that's all
You
right.
like right field or left field? I like to go left field. I didn't have very strong arms to play right, so I play left. People are going like, "What is Rico
Second,
talking about?"
second base, no
There you
arm.
go. You must be right. Around 5'8", 5'9".
A little 5'6".
You see,
Yeah,
second baseman, they're either between 5'6" to 5'8".
yeah,
Shortstop's about 5'8" to
yeah,
6'2".
yeah,
Anyway, now I forgot what I was going to say. Okay, when it comes to hierarchy and kingship, when it comes to you have a king, and then you have the prince.
yeah,
Now, when the king when okay, so when the king is when the prince is enthroned is when he would in the ancient Near East, and that's when he will get the worship or the reverence. Let's talk
yeah,
about the reverence
yes,
because they knew that that prince who is going to be king was actually endorsed by their God in the ancient Near East.
yes,
So the moment that he becomes enthroned, the reverence and the worship they call it is because of the one who put him in that position, correct? Which is
right,
the gods.
yes.
Perfect.
Now, and you're right, that sounds more Egyptian in some respects, and I don't know what the connection is there, because in Mesopotamia, we're never told how that works. In other words, and usually, um, if you're the king and I'm one of the princes, how do I know I'm to be in the royal line? Sometimes it's defined by history. In other words, dad
Right.
died and I took over, and so and the reason I took over is because the gods chose me. How do I know the gods chose me? Because I took over. And so it's circular reasoning.
Yeah.
Um,
Or
and so
maybe because you're the firstborn, and by and large, they believe the firstborn was the one in charge of the family, as a
yeah,
pater familias, you know?
yes, except to think about it, why do you think David is having such a difficulty with Solomon?
Yeah.
Everyone knows that Solomon's not the firstborn, but he is the firstborn of his favorite wife.
Right. Just
Uh,
like
so,
just like Joseph.
yeah, well, that's the other is, and by the way, and I think that when Joseph is being given a coat of many colors, you think of in Sunday school, oh, that, what's the story? Oh, Joseph got a nice gift and all the other brothers are jealous, but you shouldn't be jealous. Actually, I think Jacob is basically bestowing the legal firstbornship onto his 11th son there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
no wonder all the other ones are upset.
Yeah, of course. By
Um,
the way, the Hebrew, I talked to some of my friends in Israel, the rabbis, and the one guy who's a Hebrew scholar, and he says, "Well, we don't really know. It means a long sleeve coat or many colors." But then when we went to the ancient Near East, and I forgot which article I read, is what you said. He was the firstborn of Rachel, but not of the firstborn of Leah. So he
yeah,
was within his rights to pick which one he wanted to give it to. So,
right.
and I think it's so prevalent because in chapter 38 of the book of Genesis, the whole story, and people miss it, it's
Yeah.
about the coat.
Yes.
It's all about. So the question is, what is it about this coat that everybody's fighting over it? But they talk about this like a rainbow color and stuff.
Yeah, I don't know the significance of it, but you're right. In fact, um, what was I going to say? Uh, legitimacy. You think of it, Judah probably ends up being a legal firstborn for a while too, because Reuben has probably violated by sleeping with his father's concubines. Simeon and Levi, perhaps because of Genesis 34, have ruined their father's reputation. Now we're not told all of this, but maybe this is why Judah has that center stage. And of course, the whole purpose of Genesis 38 is to show that the Judah's line travels through,
Right.
down to this is how David becomes, um, you know, in that line.
It's quite interesting. Now that you mentioned Judah, let me ask you just to make sure, because that's why you study ancient Near East, so Mesopotamia. All right. For what I understand, and the articles I read, uh, it's just like in the New Testament talk about fornication. And when I began to look into the command, "Do not commit fornication," people assumed in the Western world that that's sex before marriage, when in fact it was a ritual sex which was considered worship. So to them, that was not immoral. It was just a way of worship. Well, I read somewhere, and again I can't remember, that they believe that once in their life a woman can be at the gate of the city or the temple. Are you laughing? So I guess I'm on the right track.
Because
Go wrong with it. Go wrong with it. Go ahead.
I wrote an article on that. I think I sent it to you, the one on Herodotus and and Babylonian women. I think I sent it.
I think it was your article that I read a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, that's the one where we don't know what Herodotus is talking about, because there's nothing specifically like that. And so I think, as usual, Herodotus is probably seeing a cultural concept and interpreting it in his own context, kind of like what we do with the Bible.
Right?
I'll look at something that happens in the Old Testament and I try to apply it into my modern context, which, by the way, we can tell your viewers, of course we want to apply this. That's the whole point, but you have to go through a longer process to get there.
Yeah.
That's all we're doing. We're not doing this. I mean, I got into this because it was really fun for me, and I'm sort of a geek at this, but after a while, as I matured, hopefully speaking, I realized, oh my goodness, this is really important.
Right.
This is a more serious issue. It can help me understand and tweak my understanding of things. And so, yes. And so I don't know whether, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. If I'm a Babylonian father, when I give my daughter over as a bride, if she's not pure, the bride wealth is gonna go down. If I can't
Yeah.
her virginity, that's terrible. And so why would I have her go to the temple and lose her virginity? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. No father, no respecting father in their right mind would do anything like that. And there's no custom that deals with that. And so that's what I talk about in that article. But Herodotus doesn't just make it up either. He's
Right.
misunderstanding something. He's
So,
talking
but
about.
in the book of Genesis, it's quite interesting because when you go through the chapter, and by the way, in Rome, it existed something similar like that when it comes to some of the worship. Um, but okay, so in the book of Genesis, Genesis 38, it kind of talks about um, when she asked for something,
Yeah.
Tamar, she asked for something because he broke an oath. So she had all the legal rights to reclaim,
Yes.
whatever was broken. And she was being nice. She didn't take everything. She was entitled to everything. Okay. She was not a gold digger. She just wanted a son. Anyway,
Well,
go ahead.
I think you know what I think she's asking for? My joke is it'd be like asking for your MasterCard, your driver's license, and
Correct.
your library card. In other words, everything that identifies you as you. That's what I want. Just to
Yeah.
make sure. In other words, she's not taking all of his stuff. She's just taking the things that identify him as him. Uh,
Right.
and of course, when he finds out that there is no prostitute, no functioning prostitute living in the area, he basically has to go and get new cards.
Well,
Uh,
that's the thing though that he says when he sends his servants to go get her, he uses the word for kana, prostitute. But then when the servants come back, kadasha, which is like the holy one,
yeah,
which that is implied that was more like in the realm of religion at the time.
I'm guessing because we really don't know how that term is so controversial. Obviously, it can mean purity in one context, and then
Right.
something evil in another context, and we don't know whether there was a position or a title or whatever it is, because don't they use the word zonah in other cases? In other words, they
Right.
just are a harlot. And by the way, that also might be a literary license too, where the listener hears, all right, that word was used this time, this word was used this time, and so it might be just tweaking in the ear. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard.
How much time you got?
Maybe just a minute or two here.
All
And
right,
by
great.
the way, the whole point of these discussions is to confuse the viewer more than they were before, but also to spur you on to say, hey, I want to look into this stuff. And so and one thing about Rico, and I mentioned this to him before we got on, or maybe during, I don't know, but he's learning all this stuff, and basically all I am here to verify that he's on the right track, and he's been on the right track about 99.9% of the time so far.
Thank
So,
you.
well, thank you. I mean, you're making the job really easy.
Well, I mean, to me, it's encouraging both ways. To you as a teacher, because you never met me until about a month and a half. We never really met in
Yeah,
person. We just only through the internet.
yeah.
But I have a feeling we're going to be really good friends.
Someday,
So,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Well, no, I mean,
absolutely.
we'll meet someday. We're friends.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, but what I think was great is that as a professor for so many years, you write stuff, and then some guy that you never met is reading your stuff and taking it serious. And then from there, it evolves to a complete different research on my own because I only got my master's like 6 years ago, and then I went to my bachelor's. I'm trying to work on my doctorate, which is the writing is a pain, but anyway.
Oh yeah, no kidding.
But it's got to be encouraging to you to know that, all those years as a professor that there is somebody who is actually researching it, validating it, who takes the time to take it to all the audiences, again, to continue the same legacy of education. I think that's important.
It's
And I want to
very,
thank you for all the time and effort that you put in. And I'm glad that you give me a platform to allow me to validate information because I think this is extremely important information for the people who want to read the Bible.
I
And
agree.
I've been pushing it for 16 years now. It was hard the first few. People
Yeah.
thought I was nuts, you know.
Oh, they still think I'm nuts, but that's all
Well,
right. Uh,
religious people, they can be a little harsh, man.
yeah, I understand that, but I think that they have a passion for belief, and sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's bad. So
That
if
is
I'm
true.
absolutely passionate about what I believe in, then it's hard for me to think that you might have a passion that's different, a belief that's something different than mine. And so that was my training in school is that, hey, I mean, for example, I can end with this. Yesterday, I gave you that list server about Jack Sasson. And so if you haven't done it yet, I would encourage you to do that. One of these days is to get on that list serve. An article came out about an archaeologist who used to excavate in Syria. Glenn Schwartz is his name. And he was digging at an obscure little site. The Arabic name is El Mara, mother of I forget what the Mara is. But anyway, might even be,
Bitterness?
could be Mary.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, they think it's the ancient city called Tuba. Sounds like an
Oh,
instrument,
yeah.
but anyway, mid third millennium. Well, he found in his tombs that are undeterred, he found alphabetic inscriptions dated 500 years earlier than anything we ever found. They thought the
Wow.
alphabet was first they thought it might have been originated in Egypt, then they thought it was originated in Syro-Palestine. Now we find it, 500 years earlier now.
Wow.
Just so in other words, if I would have told you, if you would have asked me, you know, uh, a month ago, when was the alphabet invented? I would have said, 1900 BC in Canaan. And now I'm 500 years wrong. And
Wow.
that's just new information that, it not only does it add to our uh, knowledge, it embarrasses what we thought we knew. It just changes the
That,
focus.
is
That
that why your attitude, and my students know that I'm the same way? We have to be pliable and flexible to know that we have to adapt and to
Yeah.
correct certain things because it keeps changing, the information keeps coming out.
Yes, but I think that we can still take that humility into even our theology, realizing that am I banking on my understanding of theology to be correct, or is it God? It's God, obviously. And so
Yeah.
like you said before, I'm going to pray to God and say, hey, this is my best shot. I hope I do okay when I speak to
Right.
this audience. Uh, if I, and I suppose you could say something like, God help me do this, but if there's any mistake in it, that was me. If everything that was good in it, that was God. It doesn't
Right.
mean that it was worthless. It just means that you remember I'm just a speaker. That even the concept of modern prophecy, I think, is encouragement. It's not authoritative. It's
Yeah.
speaking a word that God prompted me to speak.
One quick comment before you have to go, and I appreciate your
Sure.
time, is this. How do you feel, more on the personal level, how do you feel when they take verses of topics that you've studied and they apply it completely off out of its context? How do you, as a professor with more experience than me, I'm struggling because I don't want to be the theology police. That's not really what I want. But at the same token, we have a responsibility because you say I'm a Mesopotamian scholar, and there's a distinction between biblical scholars, right? So
Yes.
I'm trying to put the context of the ancient Near East and Egyptology into the Bible. So I think I'm between both. But
Yep.
how do you deal with hearing a ridiculous interpretation of a text that you have studied, that you have researched, that you have dug in the dirt, that you've been there, and then how do you deal with that? I mean, I'm struggling with trying to deal with, do I correct? Do I say something? If I do, I'm the bully. If I don't say something, I'm complacent. I mean, it's a little taxing.
Okay, you think about it, it really is no different than any other aspect of life. And so, for example, if you see one of your friends and they were mean to a child, or if
Yeah,
they were mean to their wife, you know, so and you got to talk to them. So when do you do it? Do you talk to him and shame him right in front of him? Say, hey, stop doing that. That's you jerk,
yeah,
stop. Or do you say, hey, do you want to go have coffee? And let's, and while you're talking to him and say, you're a good guy. You do this well and this well, this well. Oh, by the way, that was really wasn't too cool when you said such and such to Mary,
yeah,
or, whatever. And so really, is this any different? You think about it. When does this happen? It's almost always the Old Testament.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. And it's because the Old Testament is scary. I'm going to show you one more book real quick. Let me see if I can find it. There it is. Uh, Another one of my colleagues, he's a Catholic scholar, but really, really good. This is a weird title. The Old Testament is dying. And he's
Don't move it. Please don't move it yet.
okay.
Keep it right there. All right.
All right. I'll let you take a look at this at some point when I don't know whether it's on a PDF file, but the whole point of his book is that the Christians have taken the Old Testament as if it's a prop, and we use it for Sunday school stories, and we basically rip it out of its context. He's also an ancient Near Eastern scholar, by the way. But
Right.
the point of doing this is to show that it's been maligned, mishandled. And so what happens when I hear this? Because I hear it, from if I hear it from a pastor in the pulpit, I have to decide, all right, is this something worth me talking to? Do I know this person? Do I have a relationship with them?
Yeah.
In other words, if they say something that is so off base and I think, oh my goodness, this is going to really harm the congregation, then I might walk up to the guy and said, have you understood? That was an interesting interpretation. That it doesn't. I don't get that out of that passage.
Yeah.
And there are some, obviously most pastors that I talk to are younger than I am. And I have a couple of guys at my church who are younger when they preach. They'll, and my wife even told me this. She says, before you talk to Pastor so-and-so, think of 10 nice things to say before you say the one thing that you need to say, and so I said, okay, well, and so I said, that was an interesting interpretation. It doesn't seem to fit,
Right.
or I have to ask them questions or whatever. And so it's kind of like the book of Proverbs. When do I use a particular proverb? It depends on the context, because
Yeah.
and so you have to say, all right, when is a good time for me to talk to so and so, or is this a hill to die on?
Right.
And so, and of course, in the early years, it was really easy for me to think, well, I'm going to tell them what I think because it's so important. And of course, the issue became me. I want to make sure that that I know that you're wrong. And of course, if I do that to you and you do that to me, we're going to feel alienated. And we're going to say, no, I don't, now I don't have to listen to Rico because he alienated me and he insulted me, rather than asking questions. And of course, it's kind of like the same way when you said that your rabbi pulled out a book and showed you something. You say, well, how did you know that?
Yeah.
And so, oh, well, there's a whole new world out there. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
for whatever reason, God prompted you to look into all this stuff and become
Yeah.
obsessed with it.
I'm just trying to learn how to present it and how to deal with it and share with my students and my friends, and not to try not to be the theology police, but
Yeah.
what is frustrating in a way is when they establish an argument about something that clearly they don't have the background just by the way
Yeah.
they're explaining it. But
Yes.
I know it's over the time. I don't want to abuse your time, but I want to thank you, Professor, for always being grateful.
My pleasure. My
Thank you
pleasure.
for being here. And are we on for next week, man?
Yes. Yes.
Great. You got to pick the topic. You let me know what you want to talk about. We got.
Well, I'm going to email you about that and we'll haggle over this.
That sounds great. By the way, so the audience out there, please understand that when we get here on Mondays, he tells me what he wants to talk about. Then I got to go study it out and make sure I ask questions and research more, remember things. and it's really fun exchange. So I want to thank you guys for joining me, and thank you guys for being here. And I look forward to seeing Professor next week again. We'll
Yep.
talk and we'll dialogue some more. Shalom to all of you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.